How's it? Welcome back to the garage. Today I want to talk about plugs. And specifically I want to talk about the plugs we get in South Africa and what you can do to make your life easier. Now, in South Africa we get four different kinds of plugs. We've got the standard 3-prong, which everybody is probably familiar with. This has been around for a long time in South Africa. And it's called a TypeIn plug, if you want the technical name for it. And that's probably the most common one you see. The second kind of plug you're going to probably see is the 2-prong plug. And this is called a Type F. And this will come pretty much on any appliance that doesn't require an earth, for the most part. Power tools sometimes. Basically an appliance that's covered in plastic, where there's no metal parts that are accessible and there's no earth required. The third type of plug we get in South Africa is the round 2-pin plug, or the Shiko plug. It's a UK standard, and it's called a Type F plug. And this often comes on appliances that were for the European market. I've got recently, most of the tools I bought have had one of these on. It's extremely inconvenient because it doesn't fit in the normal 2-prong adapter. You need the round 2-prong adapter, and that takes up a lot of space. The fourth type of plug we get in South Africa is this. Now this is kind of like the 2-pin plug. It's got the same shape around the pins here, and a 2-pin plug fits in the same socket as this. This is a Type N plug. Sometime back in South Africa, we also used to have something called a Type D plug. That was a 3-pin plug, similar to this, just much smaller, and it was limited to 5 amps. And that was primarily used for lighting circuits. And to use it, you would normally require an adapter that went from the Type M to the Type D size. So you might ask, why so many different types of plugs? And really it comes down to the fact that when electricity started to become a more mainstream invention, it started to get utilized in all sorts of different places in the world by different companies, all at the same sort of time. But there was no body that was overlooking the system. So everybody developed their own standard, their own connection, their own shape that was applicable to them. And you can think of it like a cell phone charger. When cell phones first came out, every company had a different shaped charger. Even from the same company, different phones had different chargers. And that was kind of for the same reason. Everybody developed their own thing which they thought was correct at the time. So like cell phone chargers, luckily we've sort of got down to 3 main cell phone plugs. Internationally, we're now down to 14 different electrical sockets. So you may ask, can't we standardize these plugs across the world? And the truth is, the IEC, which is the International Electrotechnical Commission, started trying to standardize these in the 30s already. But it wasn't until 1986 that the first standardized design for a round pin plug for use in 250 volt systems was published, and that was IEC 60906-1. Later in 1992, they also published a standard for a flat pin design for 125 volt systems, and that was IEC 60906-2. So discussions around standardizing the plugs in South Africa started in 1993, and in 2006, the new IEC standard plug, the Type N, had been published in SANS 164-2, which is the South African national standard for plugs and sockets for use in households and similar processes. So in 2012, the new Type N plug was introduced into SANS 10142-1, which is also known as the wiring code. In 2016, it was announced that it was going to become semi-mandatory, and in January 2018, the new Type N socket became a mandatory requirement for any new installation or circuit. So that basically means that if you do a new circuit, a new building, or a new installation, every plug point has to have at least one Type N socket on it. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go and change everything in your house, because existing is fine. The existing Type 3-point plug is fine still. It hasn't disappeared. This has become a new plug standard in South Africa alongside what already exists. So to date, only 2 countries have actually adopted the new IEC standard plug, the Type N. That would be South Africa and Brazil. But Brazil has already deviated from this by using the same plug to supply both 230 volts and 117 volts out of the same socket. Now, it's likely you probably haven't seen one of these plugs before. I'm in the electrical industry, and it even took me by surprise when this new standard was introduced. And I haven't yet seen any appliance applied with this plug on it. So you might ask why? Why the change? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. The new standard is safer, and that's probably the most important point. the existing 3-point plug allowed you to be able to touch the metal parts when you inserted and removed the plug, which could lead to electrocution. Now, there should be a bit of insulation at the base of the pins, but you can see, like in this plug, that's not there, and that allows you to possibly touch it when you've taken it out of a socket. There's also the false sense of security that because there's a switch on the socket, if it's switched off, you can't get shocked, and that's not always the case. And the last thing that everybody will know is that the plug holes in a socket for a Type M plug are massive comparatively, and children can easily stick their fingers or an object in there and get electrocuted. Now, the new Type N plug and socket addresses these issues. They are designed in such a way that you cannot come in contact with the pins while inserting and removing the plug, and you can't stick anything into the live holes, as the shutters that cover those holes have to be pressed at the same time to move out of the way. And as a bonus, the Type-C 2-pin plug that we're so familiar with also fits in a Type N socket, which makes it a lot more useful, and you don't need a bunch of adapters to plug in things like cell phones or two-prong appliances. Now, one of the other key factors in this is cost. So the new Type N plug uses about 1/5 of the brass of their old Type M plug to get the same or better current carrying capacity of 16 amps. Now, that's enough of the history. Let's get into wiring a plug. Now, I want to talk about wiring two different kinds of plugs here. The old Type M 3-pin and the new Type N 3-pin plug. Both of these are completely acceptable. It really just depends on your application. One of the bonuses of this plug is it's much smaller and much thinner, which means you can get a few more of these into a socket or a wall outlet than you can of one of these without having to use adapters or power strips or anything like that. So for me, this is starting to become a preference in my house when I have to change a plug. So the first thing we need are our tools. I want to start with a 3-pin plug. So what you're going to first want to do is prepare your cable or cord to get a plug attached to it. Now, sometimes this could be a plug that's already there. Sometimes it could be a broken plug. I don't know. It just depends on what you've got. But it doesn't matter what it is. You just need to use your side cutters just to trim off the plug or the wire that is damaged. Now, if it's a molded plug, something like the round 2-pin plug, it's not going to be very useful to you in the future. So there you can cut the plug off right near the end, and you can probably discard it without much trouble. Now, and the next thing to do is to strip off the insulation of this piece of wire. Before we do that, we want to check how much insulation we need to strip off. So to do that, we need to open the plug. Now, most plugs either are going to have a Phillips head screw on the bottom or a flat screw. You have both screwdrivers in your essential toolbox. So just open up your plug. And here we can see what we required. So this part of the plug here, that's to hold the cable in place. If I stick the cable in there, you'll see the plug sticks to it. And that's to prevent things like pulling the wire out of the plug. If you tug on something, it's just a safety that you don't pull the connections out, the electrical connections. That's what that's for. So we want to make sure that we don't strip off the insulation that goes in that part. But we also want to make sure that we strip off enough insulation to reach the furthest point in the plug, and that's the earth. Now, the way you know the earth, the live and the neutral pins in a plug are, one, they are normally marked. If you look at the bottom, it's got an earth symbol at the top. Down here, it's got a live, and here is the neutral. So if you turn it back around, you'll see that earth is always at the top. Then, if you look at the bottom right, you will see this pin, and the bottom right also stands for brown. And brown is always the live wire. So you can remember live, brown, bottom right. If you look at the other side, that's bottom left, and that can stand for blue. And blue is always the neutral wire. So bottom left, blue, BL. So I want to make sure that I've stripped off enough insulation to reach the earth pin. So I'm going to strip off a bit extra, and I'm going to mark it over here. That's where I need to strip it off. Now, to strip off the wire, you could use your side cutters. You can just stick it on here, spin it around a few times just to get through the insulation. Or you could use your box cutting knife. this is probably easier, but you have to be careful that you don't damage the insulation on the conductors inside this cable. Otherwise you will have to start again. So I'm going to slowly remove the insulation here so I can gain access to the conductors inside. Now, if you have a wire stripper, some wire strippers actually have a function to strip off these insulations automatically, and that can be very helpful, especially if you're doing a lot of these. But if it's every now and then, it's not so much of a problem. So the insulation is now being removed, and you can see there are our conductors. BR for brown, BL for blue, bottom left, bottom right, and earth is always green or green and yellow. You want to check at the bottom here where you made your cut to remove the insulation that there's no bare wires sticking out. Now I've checked and I can see there are no cuts in the insulation and there's no bare wire. So that's good. If there was, you would need to cut this off and start again. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to just check the length of the wires required. So I've stuck it in the cable holder there, and you always want to make sure that you work around the hole or the clip in the middle where the plug is going to be closed again, because you can't put a screw or a wire over there, because you don't want to put a screw through the wire, and that's also dangerous. Although most plugs, this part here is actually extended so that it touches against the inside so that you can't put a screw through the wire. But I have come across plugs where that was possible. So now the first thing I want to do is check my earth wire. I'm going to leave a little bit of slack and I can see the full length of it. So I'm going to make a cut here with my side cutters and just trim this to length. And then my brown, my live wire, I'm going to do the same. I can stick it in there, so we'll trim this to length. And then you can make your neutral the same length. Now, what you need to now do is strip the insulation to expose the copper for just a little bit here that can go into the pin connection. So to do that, we can do it in a similar way to we took the insulation off the outside of the cable. Either we can strip it off with our side cutter, we can strip it off with a knife, whatever's going to work for you will be easiest for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the side cutter. Now what you want to do is you don't want to crimp too hard, you just want to just put a bit of pressure on it, and then you can pull it away like that, and there, expose the wires. Again, a wire stripper here would be very useful, but this works just as well, especially if your side cutters are new and sharp. There we go. And then again, just a little bit of pressure, and that's it. So now you've exposed your wires. So now it's time to make the connection. So we get our plug back, put our cable in, and you will see, typically in these plugs, that there's a small hole here with the screw on top. You undo the screw, and then you can stick the copper part of your wire into the hole, and then you screw the screw down to hold it in place. So let's do that with the first one. Now what's important here is you want to make sure that these connections are tight. If they are loose, it could lead to a hot connection, and that is where proper contact is not made, and you will start to generate heat and you will start to arc, and that can be a fire risk. But also you don't want to tighten it too much, otherwise you can cut straight through the copper and then you have the same problem of a hot connection or a complete connection that's not made at all, and that can also be dangerous. So let's connect the live, brown, bottom right. There we go. And then you do the same with the neutral, bottom left, blue. What I always like to do now is just make sure all the wires are tight. So I give each one a little tug with my screwdriver, make sure it doesn't pull out, and I'm happy. Yep, it's good. Make everything neat, and then you can put the top on. And there you have it, one newly wired plug. Now I want to do the same with the TypeIn plug, the new plug, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It is a little bit more tricky and a bit more of a hassle, but I'm finding the benefit of it in my house because it takes up less space and I can fit more plugs into an outlet on the wall, because those outlets are now available with up to 6 or even 8 sockets for a TypeIn plug. Now to do the same with the TypeIn plug. As you can see, it's a lot skinnier, but it also has a Phillips head screw holding it together. Always just remember lefty loosey, righty tighty when undoing screws. I never forget like that. Now you see this one's a bit more tricky to work with because the pins are actually inside the plug. So what you actually have to do with these is you have to push the pin out. Then you can access it. So in the one way, it's a bit easier to work with because you can remove the pin to wire into it. But on the other side, it's a little more tricky because there's just a little bit less space inside this. And also your wires now are a bit, well, they're uneven because your wire comes in here, but here's your one conductor and here's the other. So this one has to be longer, this one has to be somewhere in the middle. So in terms of live, neutral, and earth, exactly the same philosophy. If you hold this plug down, same way as you would hold the other one with the big pin at the top, earth pin, earth is always at the top. You've got bottom right, and that is live, and bottom left, and that is neutral. And if you look on the bottom, you'll find the same. Live, neutral, earth. So I've already got my wire pre-stripped out here. What you just want to do now is you want to cut to size. So in this case, we've got a little screw-on connection that holds our wire in place instead of the little fingers that held it together in this plug. So I'm just going to loosen this as well so we can get the cable in there. You just remove the one screw, you can just swivel it out the way. So if I need to grip the cable, I will check here. My live wire is already the right length. My earth, I'm going to keep the same length, and it's just the neutral that I'm going to have to trim a little bit. So let's do that. So the neutral has been trimmed off. I'm just going to strip it the same way. Now it's time to make the connections. Like I said, there's a little bit less space inside this plug, so you have to be a bit careful. But I'm going to do it by removing the pins. I found that just to be easier. So now I can connect my live pin. And this one uses just a tiny little Phillips or a flathead for the pins. So if you just pay attention to which way the pin fits in, it fits in that way. So I want to bring in my cable from this side so that I don't make any funny bends or potentially damage it. So that's the live pin. Now I will do the earth. The earth, you can see, also comes in the same side. Well, the earth comes in the front. It's got two flat sides, one over there and one over there. And if we just look at how it fits into this hole, we can see that we're going to have to bring our earth cable in from this side. So let's do that. And then last we do the neutral. Again, if we check which way it fits into the socket here, it goes this way, the screw faces that way, and we can see it's held in place like that. So we're going to bring our cable in from this side. Alright, let's stick the pins back in the plug. Make sure we guide the wires all around the space that's available. Alright, so if you look at the top of this plug, you will see that there's these little posts that actually are going to push down and keep those pins in place. So you don't have to be worried about, once the plug's closed up, those pins pushing back out, because these little standoffs here are going to keep them where they're meant to be. So all of our wires have been put into place here, everything's out the way. Let's tighten down our cable holder or a saddle. You want to make sure it's gripping the insulation part of your cable. So we're going to make sure everything's nice and tight, it's gripping the cable, and now we put the top on. And there you have it. 2 newly wired plugs, ready for use in your house to save space or to make your life more convenient. Now remember, electricity is dangerous. You can't see it coming, but when it hits you, you'll know all about it. And you could easily die. So if you're ever unsure with any electrical work, please consult a professional. If you're not comfortable doing something, don't even attempt to do it. Always, when working with electricity, make sure that the power is isolated. If you're working with a wall plug, make sure that the circuit is switched off. If you're working with an appliance, make sure that the plug is removed. And there you have it, how to wire a plug. If you found this video useful, please give it a like and consider subscribing to this channel. And remember, until next time, stay safe.